So what's this big question you have?
The big question I have is, were Adam and Eve real historical people?
That's interesting because I've got a similar sort of line of question of like, is this actual historical people, or is it all just a metaphor, or is it sort of more poetry or poetic sort of writing?
Well, I think we can dive into this in a few different ways. Firstly, does anyone know the common scientific understanding of how humans came to be? Like, let's pretend we're not looking at the Bible right now. What are sort of like the facts of modern science when it comes to humanity?
They're like atoms from an exploded star.
Oh yeah, you're going real way back. Yeah, okay, sure. Big,
Dinosaur eggs? I don't know.
we would be kind of cool if we were from dinosaur eggs,
okay,
but
sure. Big Bang happened. Particles create the universe. Earth is there. Dinosaurs are there. Later, humans come along.
sort of from primates, so from monkeys, sort of thing.
Yep, as in Homo sapiens and primates share a common ancestor.
Mm.
Yep, there was a common ancestor somewhere that had two kids. One eventually became humans and one eventually became monkeys.
Sort of, and then sort of just going backwards through evolution of starting in the like going all the way from land animals to sea creatures to whatever that was.
One-celled organisms
Yeah,
somewhere.
and
Yep.
then eventually, and then flip it. So one cell organisms all the way coming up to being what we are now.
Yep. Modern geneticists will say that based on the genetic diversity of the current human population, that they can't go back any further than 10,000 individuals. In other words, there must have been an initial population of 10,000 Homo sapiens to account for our current genetic diversity. Any less than it doesn't make sense on a scientific level. The other kind of fact of human evolution is that the first Homo sapiens appeared in Africa approximately 200,000 years ago. And so those are kind of the facts. And if you're on YouTube, you'll now see me air quoting facts. Those are the facts of human evolution.
So how do we know what nationality he was? Like were they African or Asian or Alaskan? Like, how do we know?
I mean, all the races we know today were just slight changes in humans living in a certain area for a prolonged period of time. So given that the first Homo sapiens evolved in Africa, I can only assume that they potentially look like modern Africans. I
What?
can't tell if Morgan's screen froze or whether she was just like absorbing this
What?
brand new information for the first time.
I saw the eyes go wide.
Does that mean that Jesus was African?
No, because Jesus lived a good 198,000 years after the first human based on the scientific understanding.
I'm so confused.
So he was Middle Eastern, so more of a Middle Eastern descent and look.
This isn't in my kid's Bible.
Jesus was definitely Middle Eastern. As for Adam and Eve and their nationality, if they were the first humans that appeared in Africa, which we haven't yet decided if they were, then they would have probably looked like modern Africans.
I've just got him looking white, long hair, beard, Birkenstocks, toga.
Well, we did all grow up in the West, and that is an image fed to us for a while, but there is literally zero chance that that is what he looks like. Either Jesus or Adam. I don't know which one you were referring to right then.
I don't know anymore.
All right, so that's the scientific literature that we might have to wrestle with in a moment. The biblical literature suggests that Adam was a real person. Now, we're about to, in a few chapters, in a few episodes' time, read through a whole bunch of genealogies. Do you remember Matthew chapter 1, where we just read the genealogy of Jesus? We are going to read genealogies for the rest of the Old Testament that connect Adam to Abraham, and then Abraham to Israel, and then Israel to Jesus. In fact, Luke in the New Testament, in chapter 3, literally traces Jesus all the way back to Adam. It's hard to think how some sort of metaphorical, figurative story in Genesis could also be used in a genealogy. You also have Romans 5 and 1 Corinthians 15, where Paul uses Adam as an illustration, but he uses him as more than just an illustration. He suggests that the actions Adam took had a real tangible effect on humanity, and it's hard to see how a metaphor or a fake story that teaches a lesson can have those real tangible impacts in humanity that Paul thinks. And I think that leads to the biggest reason I'm convinced that Adam had to be a real person, which is I think the biblical story requires a first sin.
Yes.
Because if we don't have a first sin, then we are left with a whole bunch of heresies to explain why the world is full of sin.
And someone would have had to have. So if it wasn't Adam and Eve, then
Had to happen at some point.
at some point in that lineage, or just going back and back and back and back and back, someone there would have had to have done it.
Mm.
So if it either had to be Adam and Eve, and they would have had to be an actual people, then it would have been someone else. And if it was someone else, arguably their names would have come up here.
Yeah. Absolutely, you're right.
Could it possibly be possibly a mixture of both? So like they were actual people, but the way this story is sort of crafted was bits of like literally happening, bits of like poetic sort of writing, licensing of the authorship, or just lost in sort of translation over the thousands of years this has been around.
Well, from last episode when we were talking about our different views on creation, I very much got the vibe that we as a group are after some type of way of interpreting the Bible that sees no conflict between Genesis and current scientific understanding. Now, that's the vibe I got from us as a group. So that is the research I did during the week to see if I could see what are the theories that allow both to be true.
Yeah.
Like, how can we hold a currently accepted understanding of human origins in Africa 200,000 years ago? How can we allow both that and the fact that the Bible requires a historical Adam who at some point represented all of humanity and is responsible for the first sin? And I came up with two valid options, in my opinion, that would be fair ways to interpret this text and hold both of those things together. And so let me tell you the two options, and then see which one appeals to you both, and then maybe chat about them a bit more. Option one is that we have an ancient Adam. Like, this story that we're reading here happened at least over 200,000 years ago. Like, we have a really, really ancient story here. So we have an ancient Adam who is ancestor to all. The second option is that we have a recent Adam who is a representative of all. And those are the two options that I see valid. Now, I should probably explain both of them a bit more, but initial reactions. Morgan, what's your initial reaction? What do you like? Ancient Adam, ancestor to all, or a recent Adam, representative of all?
Ancestor to all, I think, makes more sense to me.
Yeah, fair. Absolutely. Josh?
I can see both being the case. You'd probably have to just expand like ancient Adam. That sort of just, I think that's a bit self-explanatory of what we see here. More recent, I get it, but I would probably just need a bit more explanation of what you're referring to.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Well, let's start with the ancestor one. Adam could be one of the first humans that evolved in Africa. He could have been leader of that tribe of first humans that appeared and then be responsible for the first sin. William Lane Craig is a proponent of this view. His book, Quest for the Historical Adam, is worth picking up if this is a viewpoint you'd like to explore more. He actually argues that Adam wasn't even a Homo sapien. He was actually let me read this right, Homo heidelbergensis, which is a species of human that lived 750,000 years ago. So he argues that that was Adam, and we have retained a story about the first person, the first human, who was actually a slightly different species to us. The reason I have a slight issue with this theory is that the way the Bible describes Adam, and more specifically his children, is that they are farmers. They are herdsmen. Like Cain and Abel, that is literally their professions. And the first evidence of this is from 8,000 years ago. Not longer, not 200,000 years ago. The first humans were not farming. Not 750,000 years ago. Those humans definitely weren't farming. So the only way around that to hold this view is to say, the author of Genesis just took what would have been familiar to his readers and explained Adam in that way, even though there's no way Adam was a farmer in the Middle East, which is how it seems to be described in the text in front of us.
Because just quickly to unpack that, so humans were first
Hunter-gatherers.
Hunter-gatherers, and then later developed the technology of farming. It wasn't, rather than like sort of our common view of like, well, they hunted and also farmed at the same time. That was ancient people.
No.
There was a sort of a timeline of when technology sort of was invented. And if you want, like, even if you like, it's funny to call farming an invention.
But it is, yeah.
But yeah.
8,000 BC is the earliest possible date for farming being invented. It's the first evidence we have of humans stopping their hunting gathering lifestyle, settling down in settlements so that they could tend a crop. And so an ancient Adam could not have been the farmer that we see described in the early chapters of Genesis. But maybe the author was just using language his readers could understand.
Yeah.
Which then leads us to our second option, which is a recent Adam who's representative of all. Now, the story of God in the Bible is him choosing individuals for tasks. Now, Adam and Eve could have just been the first humans God invited into relationship with him. As the first humans in relationship with God properly, they could have represented all of humanity in a priestly sense. Like as we hit later in the Old Testament, we see that priests represent all the people before God. In the same way that Jesus is our great high priest now represents us before God. And so in the same way, Adam and Eve, as literally the OG priests, the OG people in relationship with God, they, as our representatives, had a relationship with God, but also sinned. And so therefore, an Adam who was a farmer in about 8000 BC in the Middle East, exactly as the text seems to describe, could have been this first human. There's several people that are proponents of this. John Walton, look up his book, The Lost World of Adam and Eve. He particularly argues for this. Joshua Swamidass on the genealogical Adam and Eve also argues for a variation of this. Those are just a few places to go if you want to pursue this more. But what are our thoughts of this from the table?
I'm so tired and my brain's like cooked with what I just heard. I'm just like,
Well, we're still getting over the whole idea that Adam was probably black.
I know, I'm just so confused.
Well, he's only black if he was an ancient Adam. If he was a recent Adam, he was just a Middle Eastern man.
So taking the that second one, how was that described again?
I described it as a recent Adam, representative of all.
So taking the idea of a recent Adam, the question that I would have though, so if it's a representative and then sin comes into the world after that, what about everyone prior to it? And how does that, so if we're also saying though, Adam and Eve prior to them eating the fruit had moral judgment, thus meaning everyone else had moral judgment. What about everyone that, went about their life and did whatever they were doing then? Why is it then at this point, so let's say God then chose these two people, why these two people, why then create sin after that if sin technically, like I say technically, wasn't in the world beforehand? If it was.
Let me read Romans 5:13 for us. And I'm jumping way forward in the story here, aren't I? To be sure, sin was in the world before the law was given, but sin is not charged against anyone's account where there is no law. In other words, sin is not charged until accountability comes into the world, until God specifically said what was right and wrong, until he gave that first law. The very first law was do not eat from the tree. Before that moment, he did not charge sin to anyone's account. That is the straightforward interpretation of Romans 5:13, which is otherwise a very hard verse to understand.
So he's sort of saying, well, okay, they're doing their thing up until God's come around and going, okay, so here's the order and structure, here's my law, and that's when the consequences of God's law kicks in.
Because he's finally introduced a law, or he's told the people that there is a law.
Yeah. So
and now they actually have something to break.
Yeah. So they're sort of they're mingling around, doing their thing, and then God comes in and goes, okay, this is the rule.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As soon as humans started to evolve, I hold that free will is a very important part of humanity. And so we were probably using that to be awful from the very, very beginning. But it wasn't charged as sin until there was accountability, until there was a law to measure up against. Romans 5:13 suggests that sin is not counted yet until law arrives.
And this could also sort of explain, well, cognitively speaking, going through sort of the generations of human and getting to the sort of the point where the brain, this could be the point where the brain could cognitively understand to the extent God wanted us to understand right and wrong.
That is actually C.S. Lewis's argument. C.S. Lewis holds basically that viewpoint that we've just articulated and says that at some point, the human being, upon both its psychology and physiology, a new kind of consciousness which could say I and me. It could look upon itself as an object which knew God, which could make judgments of truth, beauty, and goodness, which was far above that of previous versions.
I like that. Yeah. So sort of discussing it, it makes sense in my brain, but it makes sense for both arguments, if that makes sense.
And again, these are only the options if you're someone who wants to hold modern scientific theory about human origins and Genesis 2 as both being absolutely true. Now, if you're someone who's prepared to give up one of those two things, then you have a different range of interpretations available to you. But I think for the fact that what I got from this group last episode is very much a desire to see both of those true, then I think those are the two options before us.
That's quite interesting. It's good food for thought. I like it.
So, Morgan, you initially said the first one stood out to you. Any change in that? You sticking to it? Sticking to an African Adam?
Yeah.
Fair. If I had to be pushed, I would probably lean towards option 2, a recent Adam, Middle Eastern farmer, representative of all, who lived about 8 to 10,000 years ago. I think that's where I'd currently land, but I've held such a variety of viewpoints on this, and it's only because I've done a lot of research in the last few weeks in preparation for this episode that I've started to change and then solidify my viewpoint on it.
And we could sort of, as we said last episode, discuss this until the cows come home, like really try and unpack and work out and try and put the puzzle pieces exactly perfectly together. But the point, I think, and the greater point is not to get so hung up about it, but like we saw in the first episode, you know, it's God's glory and his creation, and here it's his law.
Yeah, and what we get from Genesis 2 outside of trying to make it work with modern science is God is the one who created humanity. He gave us a mandate. He said that we couldn't do that mandate alone. He initiates marriage. Like, those are some ground-breaking new things for the original readers of this text. For us, we probably assume all of them. But these are essential background and understanding to the way we view the world and the way that we live as Christians in the world. Like that, we can't go past what the text is trying to teach there, and it's definitely those things.
100%.